and welcome to Inspirability. Today I'm joined by Sarah Stephenson-Hunter, co-founder of Simply Equality, speaker and podcaster. So Sarah, welcome to Inspirability. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on our show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Harriet. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're the co-founder of Simply Equality. You are a speaker and a podcaster. So we've got lots of exciting things to talk about today. But first of all, can you tell me a little bit about your life growing up?
Gosh, where to start? Excuse me. So I'm from the northeast of England originally, from Northumberland. Grew up right by the sea, which was amazing. Although growing up in a small town in Northumberland had its challenges. Everybody knew your business. So yeah, my childhood was quite disrupted. So I've had health problems since. Well, actually, when I was 2 years old, I was diagnosed with a type of arthritis. Interestingly, I had just come back from holiday to Spain with my parents, and they actually thought it was a tropical disease because some of the symptoms of arthritis were fever and all sorts of stuff. But my mum persisted. So I got my diagnosis of arthritis, and that began health issues pretty much throughout my life. I then had cataracts age 7 in the days when, and this is going to make me sound ancient, when you were in hospital for 3 weeks per eye, you couldn't move your head. So I had those when I was 7. Then I started having issues with glaucoma when I was 12. That resulted in around 50 eye surgeries between the ages of sort of 13 to 18, 200 hospital visits, and bearing in mind I was travelling from Northumberland to Windsor.
So it's right in the age of the time when you're discovering yourself and you want to be going out with your friends. So how did that affect you in terms of not being able to lead a normal childhood?
It affected every single part of my childhood. Family life was disrupted. I've got a sister, but I spent a lot of time with my mum because she was the one that's travelling back and forward with me to hospital. I couldn't go out and do stuff that most teenagers do. I had to stop riding my bike when I was about 15 because it was just unsafe to do it in terms of my vision. I had about 6 months in a wheelchair when I had knee surgery in my teens. I had several periods off school, recovering from surgery. So yeah, it just affected every single aspect of my childhood growing up.
And what about a support network around you? What did you draw on?
It was hard because, as I said, I was growing up in a small town in Northumberland. My parents were amazing, but they were trying to juggle family life, work. I had some friends at school, but I couldn't go out and do stuff with them, and it was quite isolating. So I guess I did, from an early age, get quite used to being in my own company and my own, just my own space. I suppose that's when I really got into music, and also, whilst I could still see enough, I did really enjoy reading.
So in terms of, I'm thinking of just that feeling of isolation. In your case, it was through loss of sight. Maybe other teenagers, it's through being bullied or just feeling different. And we're going to move on a bit later to talk about sexuality and gender as well. So what advice would you give to anybody who is feeling isolated at that moment in their life, and how they can work through that, and the best ways to find coping strategies to deal with it?
I mean, again, this is going to make me sound ancient, but obviously this was pre-internet and the internet has its flaws, but obviously there's a lot more support out there online, support communities, support networks. And I think it's really easy when you are feeling isolated to feel like you're the only one and nobody else must be feeling that way. And, it can really affect your mental health. But I would say just reach out. And I know it's scary because especially as a teenager, you want to, come across as confident and you're finding yourself, but reach out to a friend or maybe an online forum or a teacher or anybody. And if for any reason you don't get the support you need, don't be scared to keep asking. I mean, my mum, bless her, she's not with us anymore. She had to do a lot of fighting for me to get support at school, support from social services. I was lucky, you know, I had parents like that. That may not be people watching this as experience, but you are never alone. There is always people out there who are willing to help.
And you actually mentioned when we were talking earlier that you were adopted at the age of, was it 12 weeks?
Yep, I was adopted as a baby, 12 weeks old. So my adoptive parents never hid that from me. I always knew that. My adoptive parents were amazing. They always were my parents. I always regarded them as my parents. But it's safe to say that, and then the health issues really did feed into at one stage that whole sense of, why is this all happening to me? What have I done to deserve this? You know, disrupted childhood, surgery after surgery, you know, pain, discomfort. I got bullied at school as well because, I mean, you wouldn't think it to look at me now because I'm 6 feet tall, but growing up, I was quite short, I was quite fat, I had thick glasses. I got heavily bullied. And, you know, I don't blame the kids that bullied me because that's just how things were. That still is the case now. If you're different, you get bullied. But yeah, that really did feed that and that the sense of adoption. Well, who am I? Who am I? Where do I belong? You know, my parents loved me. They sacrificed a lot for me with my health issues, so I can't fault them for that. But there is just that innate sense of, who am I? Where do I belong? Where did I come from? And at that stage, I didn't know anything about my adoption, my birth mum, and the whole circumstances. I found that out later, but at that stage, you just like, you don't know. And it really does play on that sense of, who are you in this world and where do you belong?
I think certainly, I mean, as we go through your story, there are so many instances of you discovering Sarah and Sarah discovering herself, which is something that I think is going to be really exciting for us to explore through this. With regards to bullying, it's quite interesting because actually a lot of guests on this podcast were bullied at school, and yet they've all gone on, you know, to do, as you've done, to do incredible things. Did you ever speak to those bullies later on in life? Have you ever crossed paths with them? And if so, what did you say or what would you say?
No, I haven't spoken to them since. In fact, once I left school, I was quite glad to leave school, and I didn't really have a lot of contact with people from school. I guess I've just realised in life that we all have our, you know, bullies are usually bullies for a reason. Nobody's born a bully. Whether that's their own insecurities, their own experiences, their own whatever. And I'm not excusing bullies because I think, you know, bullies need to realise the impact they can have on people, and it can be quite horrific. If I was to meet, I would just say, you know, do you realise how much your bullying hurt me? And why... You know, why is it you were doing that? What was that about? Was the things you needed to deal with? But I would also say now that I forgive them. Because, yeah, it wasn't pleasant at all. I really did have some dark times. But as I say, I do firmly believe now that people usually do things, bad things and good things for a reason. That's not to excuse the action. But there's usually something behind it.
I wonder if that's driven part of what you've done in terms of just raising awareness and helping people not feel alone, and just being this wonderful role model that you are in terms of being visible so that people can feel that they can be themselves, not feel marginalised.
I am a reluctant role model, only because I don't think I'm that special. But equally, I also realise that not many people have lived the life I've lived. And I think because I grew up feeling isolated, because I was bullied, because I felt like I didn't know what my place was in this world, that life was tough and what was I going to do in life, and I had these dreams and ideas of what I was going to try and be.
What did you want to be?
Oh, well, my original plan was I wanted to be in journalism. I wanted to be a music journalist. And I, as a 16-year-old, did stuff in the local press. I actually went on a dreams come true trip to New York when I was 19 and met F.E.A.R, the drummer for the rock band Kiss, and that was sponsored by a magazine, and I was going to do a piece for Kerrang magazine, and that was amazing, and I really wanted to do that. And this is probably a regret in life, I let somebody talk me out of that, saying, well, journalism's so hard and it's so cutthroat, and how would you do this and how would you do that? And I was probably at a vulnerable time in life, and I let them talk me out of it. However, that's never gone away, so that's why I do some of the stuff now in the media. I've had pieces printed in like Metro and Diva magazine, a lesbian magazine. I haven't written them, I've got a friend that writes them because I trust her. But I guess I made a decision that although I've been through some challenges in life, I still class myself to be quite lucky and quite privileged. And I want to share that privilege and use my privilege, use the platform I have managed to gain to show people that, regardless of what situation you are in life, and I know life can be tough, but there's always a way of finding purpose, finding meaning. And there's a lot of talk these days about, living a abundant, fulfilled, successful life. And I believe in that. But I also believe that success is different for everybody. And success doesn't necessarily mean earning lots of money, having a fancy house, having an amazing job, although there's nothing wrong with any of that. Success is whatever you want it to be.
So what does it mean to you then? What does an abundant, successful, full, happy life mean to Sarah?
It means having opportunities to share my story, to speak my truth, to be that role model, to have friends around me and support around me to allow me to do what I do. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm not a materialist. I like nice things, but it's not about what can I get for me. It's about how can I use that to have maximum impact in the world. And that's my mission, to have impact, to, leave the world a better place than they came into it. And I know that sounds very cheesy and laudable, but it genuinely is what inspires me to get out of bed in the morning, to try and do something, show something, share something, so that somebody out there, whoever they may be, in my case, whether they're a fellow disabled or LGBTQ plus person, but it doesn't have to be, it can be anybody, is like, well, if she can do it, then maybe I can do it.
So, those are really inspiring words. And just going back to that story where you wanted to be a music journalist and you let someone talk you out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure many of our viewers and listeners can relate to times when they've wanted to do something, and it's just finding that courage to take that last step that can be so hard. And it is easy to be talked out of something, or to feel that imposter syndrome, it's not for me. What would you say to anybody who is in that situation? Maybe if you could go back to Sarah then, what would you say to her to say, actually, no, go for it, you can do it?
I think a lot of it is based on fear. And I heard a great thing about fear, that fear, F.E.A.R, is false evidence as reality.
False evidence as reality?
Yeah. And a lot of us, the evidence we have comes from our family, the media, other things we see around us. And we are our own worst enemy. we will talk ourselves out of things because we do have a negativity bias. That's just the way we are. And, don't get me wrong. I've been terrified doing some of the stuff I've done. But it is about having that courage, giving something a go. If it doesn't work, well, okay, at least I tried. It can be scary, whatever it is you want to do. But it is about finding that inner strength, taking that first step, whatever that might be. And just give it a go. Just give it a go. What's the worst thing that can happen?
That's true, isn't it? It's what is the worst that can happen. I mean, if you tried, say, if you tried that career, then what's the worst that can happen? But I think it's so easy to have that fear of failure, isn't it? Just that struggle to just to find that courage to take that step. I think lots of us are always sort of scared that we'll be found out, but I think equally someone will put you in a place because they think you should be there. So Sarah, in terms of finding that self-confidence and self-belief, you seem to have that in abundance. So tell me, how do you maintain your self-confidence and self-belief?
I mean, I do have it, but it does wane at times. I'm a human being, things come along in life which knock it. But I think for me, I've always had a sense of purpose in life, that I'm here for a reason. That used to be related to the fact I was quite involved in the Christian church. So I grew up in a nominal Christian household. I became a Christian at university, was very involved. In fact, my ex-wife and I actually led a church. I'm not involved anymore because as we'll get on to my sort of explorations around sexuality and gender, then the Christian church is not renowned for being the most inclusive. So I don't have the same faith or involvement in church, but I'm still spiritual. So I have got back into meditating, just taking that time of quiet to reflect, get in tune with my thoughts, my body. There's a lot of focus on mindfulness these days, which I think is great. Anything that just helps you to take those moments to connect with yourself. And affirmations are powerful. And I know this sounds silly because I used to think the same, but literally, if you tell yourself something often enough, be it positive or negative, your brain will believe it. You can trick your brain quite easily. So I do have little affirmations I say to myself, and it's just things like catching yourself when something happens in life that knocks you back. Of saying, no, okay, so I've done this thing, it hasn't gone well, or something's not panned out the way I wanted to, but what can I learn from it? And no, it doesn't mean I'm a failure. It just means that thing didn't go as I planned. And again, I don't want to make this sound glib and easy because, I've had some big setbacks in life, and you're allowed to have those moments of feeling desperate and helpless and tears, and that's fine. As I said, we're human beings. But then it's just allowing those emotions to pass and going, actually, no, I'm still this amazing individual that has these individual strengths, talents, gifts, abilities that we all have, and I'm going to just keep going and find other ways I can share that and continue being me, even though I will probably make the same mistakes again or similar.
So Sarah, you mentioned earlier about losing your eyesight, it gradually deteriorating through your teens. So perhaps we can talk a little bit, you can pick up on the story of your eyesight progressively degenerating through your teens, your 20s, which then led to after an accident, to then the complete loss of your eyesight, and what that journey was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, it was a gradual journey. So, late teens, I did go to university, even though, come back to that question about self-confidence. My special needs teacher at the time did tell my parents that they thought I was overachieving by trying to go to university. They didn't tell me that till afterwards, but I did go to uni. and I had a great time at uni. Although when I was there, my vision wasn't great, and I think I realised soon after in the first term, falling down too many sets of stairs and breaking 2 pairs of glasses, that, okay, perhaps I need to do something about this. So I did start training with a long white cane. That was quite a deal because, I'm like 18, 19 and you just want to fit in, but I've got this big long cane that I'm using. So, you stand out and, again, when you're going out to nightclubs or whatever, you just want to fit in. But I had to ask people to, assist with finding the toilets and all that sort of stuff. So it was a challenge, but as is my way, I found a way to still enjoy things. But also at that period, I started having issues with corneal infections. So I had repeated infections to the point where in my mid-20s, I lost vision in my right eye. I won't go into detail, but yeah, it was a pretty horrid infection that meant that I lost all vision in that eye. Left eye still had some vision, but by this stage, I was using speech software. I couldn't really read any text, even with magnification or other special aids. But I was working, I was married, I was trying to live as full a life as possible, and that really carried on right through probably until actually just before I turned 40, when one Monday morning in July, I was getting a fresh tube of toothpaste out of a cupboard, bent down, and in some freak accident, the corner of the cupboard door collided with my eyeball, and that was it. Gone. And I knew pretty much straight away, because of just the pain, the type of accident it was, that this was probably it.
So you had, I'm just thinking of some of our service users, they've had disabilities that have been developing progressively over time, and some who are veterans or who were wounded in service, or people wounded in car or motorbike accidents. But you had both.
Mm-hmm.
You were gradually losing your eyesight. But was it going to completely go? Had you adjusted to the thought that you were going to lose your eyesight? But then of course it sort of suddenly went with the accident. I'm just trying to figure out how did you process that? Because you've had both to deal with.
I mean, I always knew the way it was going that my sight was only going to go one way, because of, as I said, growing up, I had cataract surgery in the days before. They did lens implants, corneal infections. Every time you have one, it leaves a scar on the cornea, and that doesn't recover. Also, because of the glaucoma, my optic nerves were getting more damaged. So I knew it was only going to go one way, but I was adapting, using what little vision I had to still do stuff. So yes, I'd been adjusting and adapting over time, but then to have it just go bang like that, in one freak moment, was still a shock. Not just physical trauma, but emotional trauma. I was quite lucky, because it's not like somebody who had 20/20 vision then suddenly losing all vision. I'd lived in the world of sight loss most of my life. So I knew how to use some of the assistive technology. As I said, I'd had cane training. By that point, I'd had 2 guide dogs. So I'd lived in that world, but I didn't expect just to suddenly lose it all. Because it's one thing having not a lot of vision, but going from not a lot to none at all was still quite a big deal, and a lot of, I had to go through a grieving process and some adjustment.
And just talking about that adjustment, because I think also in a broader context as well, I think it's very applicable to a lot of our viewers and listeners going through any very significant adjustment in their life. So how did you go through that adjustment for you, and what advice can you give that could apply to anyone listening who's also going through an adjustment?
Again, I don't want anybody to think it was easy, because it wasn't. I think those feelings of despair or grief are perfectly natural, and you should never try and sort of fast forward those. Grief is a natural process. We all grieve differently, but you need to acknowledge those feelings and work with them. I did have some specialist counsel through a sight loss counselling through a sight loss organisation to just help process the emotions. As I said, I was lucky. I was already in the sight loss world, so I was able to call upon help from mobility instructors to help me to adapt to having no vision. So, I had some more long cane training. I looked at whether there's any other technology I used. My work was good. They gave me some time off to just adjust, adapt. So I was lucky, but I would say for anybody in that situation, I think, as I said, it is about being kind to yourself, acknowledging how you feel. Those feelings are valid. If you can, reach out for specialist support. And if you can't get sort of specialist support, perhaps find another community or other people that have been through a similar experience for support. And just take time. You can't rush it. It probably took me a good year or so for things like my balance to recover, pain to subside, just to adjust to it and just adjust to my new way of living. So yeah, I hope that's applicable to whatever your situation is. Accept that it's happened. Go through the process of grieving. Reach out for support, and also realize it's not the end. As with lots of things in my life, I adapted. I did things different, but I still carried on living my life to the full.
I think one of the things that you said that's really important there is to acknowledge it, but also to try not to fast forward the process. Because I think, now we talk more and more about mental health. There's much more awareness of mental health, but I think there has often been a tendency for people just to try and fast forward that grieving process, or I'm okay, yes, it's fine, and just put it all in a box, and then it all just bubbles over, and then just one day it's just one thing that can just make everything seem so much worse. So in terms of looking after mental health then, what are your top tips for looking after mental health and acknowledging and not fast forwarding any difficult processes to go through?
I think you're right, Harry. I think there's a lot more awareness these days, which is good. Because if I think back to, my childhood and my teens and the issues I was facing, there wasn't the talk about it. And on the one hand, specifically as disabled people, we're in a no-win situation, because either we're sort of brave, courageous, inspirational people, and that means we have to, be positive and smiley and happy all the time, or we get perceived as victims that are just wallowing in the distress. And neither of those things are correct, but that's if you like, that's the spectrum of the feelings that you can go through. And I think this is the good thing nowadays, that there is that acknowledgement that it's a process, that everyone deals with these things differently, that the whole thing of how our bodies and our minds cope with trauma is just so different. And, whether that's on a physiological level or a psychological level, you just need to take your time. Don't rush it. Be honest with yourself. And other people will respond the way they respond. I had people, when I lost my sight, who were, "Oh, I'm so devastated for you. I'm so gutted for you." And I get what they were saying, but that wasn't really helpful, because it's like they're projecting their fears, anxieties onto you, and you're trying to find your own way of coping with it. So yeah, take your time, seek support if you can, and that's why it's great that there's a lot more talk these days about mental ill health and how important it is to talk about it, and just much more openness about it, even though I still think it's a massive taboo.
Yeah, and it's something, as you say, that with us having more open conversations about it, hopefully things like, male suicide, which is, the rate of suicide among young men is just it's still far too, it shouldn't, we don't happen at all, but it's just so high. It's the leading cause of death in men under 40, and having these conversations can hopefully just encourage people to seek that support in those really, really dark moments.